Obviously, everyone loved the Jim Harbaugh hire. What about the Jim Harbaugh hire of Greg Roman? That one's not as popular. But Harbaugh, being who he is getting the benefit of the doubt. Is it warranted? I'd say so. But it's also fair to be skeptical. Is Greg Roman the right guy for Herbert? On one hand, he's had a lot of success in the past. But on the other, he also was never able to sustain it. So let's take a deeper look and see what the evidence tells us about whether Greg Roman can hack it as Chargers OC, or if he's just a straight up hack. Speaking of hacks, subscribe to the channel for more below average wordplay like that. So Greg Roman is no stranger to being an offensive coordinator. In fact, this is his fourth time doing the job. In his first stint in the NFL with the Niners, he was a part of the resurrection of Alex Smith and the inception of Colin Kaepernick. In both cases, the offenses weren't necessarily explosive, but they worked around the quarterback's weaknesses and strengths. That's why many expected Greg Roman to be a head coaching candidate early in his Niners tenure. However, his offense with Kaepernick grew stale over the years, and defenses felt they could predict their simple passing offense. Was it Kaepernick or Roman? Well, it's hard to tell if you look at the rest of Roman's tenures, since they also included other run-first quarterbacks. His short stint with Buffalo, which also included him being fired for Anthony Lynn, who later became the Chargers head coach. Talk about a sliding doors moment. Included Tyrod Taylor as his QB. Then with the Baltimore Ravens, he obviously had Lamar Jackson. Coming into the league, Lamar certainly was a run-first QB. Not necessarily because he didn't have any arm talent, but because he just was so damn fast. Also, his footwork was lacking from years of just college play that was more random because of being able to dominate so easily as an athlete. So when Greg Roman devised an offensive system around using a lot of tight ends and fullbacks to help him run, it made sense. So much so that Lamar won an MVP. But again, years later, that offense ran stagnant, with Lamar even complaining that defenses know what they're doing. In some ways, it even seems defensible to postulate that a lot of Lamar Jackson's contract negotiation problems in the offseason were really just a way to strong-arm Roman out, since the Ravens didn't budge on the contract demands, but did when it came to getting Todd Monken. Lamar responded, showing that he could run a more traditional NFL offense, throwing for the most passing yards in his career, as well as the most passing attempts. Though it should be noted, he actually had a lot less passing touchdowns this year than he did during his MVP season. He threw for 36 that year. More on that in a bit. Regardless, Lamar has shown that he could outgrow the Roman offense. This begs two questions. Why didn't Greg Roman ever adjust? And what does that mean for Justin Herbert and the Chargers? Let's get into that. Greg Roman's press conference didn't do much to dissuade fears that they'd be running the ball a lot with Justin Herbert at QB, pointing out that a running game could actually elevate Herbert, and not to mention the simple fact of doing it, he believes, helps dictate defenses. He also says something very interesting that the headlines kind of ignored, which is that the offense, he said, would be a little different from what he ran with Jackson back in Baltimore. The word different is promising. Little, not so much. And as you'll recall, when we look through his resume, there really isn't much different between his stints. Sure, with Alex Smith, they didn't run him as a quarterback as much as he did with Lamar or anyone else. But he still didn't pass much either. The former first overall pick ended the season with barely over 3,100 yards. Sure, he wasn't ever much of a passer, but Andy Reid did get 4,000 yards out of him a couple seasons later. Of course, there's a huge difference when it comes to arm strength, when it comes to Herbert and Alex Smith. So you'd think, logically, the offense would be different. And it likely will be. But I don't think he was being modest when he used little as an adjective. The biggest misunderstanding when it comes to Greg Roman is the fact that he runs the ball for the sake of running the ball. It's not that that's wrong. It's just it doesn't do what he does justice, which is bend the knee to the running game. In narrow, when some teams don't even have a fullback, Greg Roman always has one, and often uses him even as a running back. And when it comes to personnel groupings, he's quite fond of 13 personnel, which features 3 tight ends on the field. And even if you were to look at his personnel groupings for some insight into how often he uses tight ends and whatever, and you might not get a clear picture there either of how often he uses those players. Roman will, for example, sneak his fullback into a running back position sometimes, and use tight ends as receivers more often than most. The point being, his use of 13 personnel, as well as the little flourishes he adds, are in service of the running game. Certainly having more tight ends on the field helps with blocking, and using a running back as a fullback helps guys like Lamar Jackson get more space on designed runs. So you can see now what I mean when I say he doesn't just like to run the ball, he bases his offense around it. And if that's the case, and there's little proof that he likes to budge on this sort of thing, what does that mean for Justin Herbert and your dynasty team? I think it's fair to say that Herbert's going to be productive. Like I mentioned earlier, Lamar was incredibly efficient when it comes to touchdown passes in his MVP season. And with a functional running game giving him space, Herbert could definitely get some opportunities deep down the field. For example, in that same 2019 season, Jackson had the 8th most air yards per attempt, meaning when they did throw, they were throwing down the field quite often. Though Lamar's deep accuracy wasn't the greatest, some of that might have been just he didn't have the best receivers to throw to, but overall he definitely was more comfortable throwing to the middle of the field. Whereas Herbert has shown that during times in his career, his deep ball accuracy is excellent, like in 2021 when he finished with a 48.4 completion rate on deep passes, ranked second in the league. In other words, there are ways for Herbert to be very productive, even if they're running the ball a lot. Beyond that, though, there are reasons for optimism that the offense can be not necessarily pass-happy, but be pass-friendly. And that's with the addition of Marcus Brady as passing game coordinator. Brady comes from the Frank Reich coaching tree. Reich has become a laughingstock recently, but that's what happens when you decide to do business with David Tepper. But he's a strong offensive mind with a particular kind of passing offense. One that runs a lot of 12 personnel, meaning 2 tight end sets. In an era when the NFL has been trending around 60% usage of 11 personnel, which is only 1 tight end, Reich and his offenses managed to produce high passing numbers while featuring bigger tight ends on the field. In particular, in 2018, when he still had Andrew Luck, his offense was top 6 in passing yards, but 20th in rushing yards. This despite featuring a personnel grouping that makes it easier to run the ball. This tells you that Brady at least has the background when it comes to passing out of bigger personnel groupings. It's unclear how much of an effect a passing game coordinator will have on an offense, but the fact that Harbaugh hired him when he's not really in his tree feels like there's something more to it. Could Roman maybe focus more on 12 personnel than 13? Baby steps? That could be interesting. Not to mention, Andrew Luck, who had success in that offense, is a player Harbaugh is very familiar with. We'll have to wait and see for that. For now, I think it's fair to say that even if Roman doesn't change much, I think it's actually quite unfair to think that the offense will be bad. He's shown in several stops that he can have an offense that's good. The real challenge is if he can do that long term. Either way, I think we'll definitively get an answer of whether Greg Roman is capable of change or not during his tenure with the Chargers. You can call it his Rubicon. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, and pass it around if you can. I'd really appreciate it.